This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you by Loctite Tight Foam. Say no to inefficient and drafty. Say yes to Loctite Tight Foam. When pros need to seal gaps too small for insulation but big enough to create a draft, they reach for Loctite's Tight Foam. The high-density foam forms a tenacious bond to most common building materials, stays flexible to prevent cracking, and keeps air, moisture, and pests out of the house. Whether you're adding R value to the rec room or finishing a boring basement, give that space a second chance with Loctite Tight Foam. Visit LoctiteProducts.com for more information.
Patrick, you're a perfect neighbor for nighttime view yourself, because not everyone would appreciate that.
I wanted to go help.
Wait till they find out you have a blower door and all kinds of tools in your barn, right?
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hello.
Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Brian Pontalillo.
Hey, everyone.
And producer Andres Samaniego. Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, for those of you who listen to the show, I'm guessing you've noticed that Jeff Rose is not on the producer's desk today. And there's been a shakeup, I suspect you all have heard by now, that Taunton Press was acquired by Active Interest Media a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, some of the folks didn't make the transition to the new company. And sadly, our longtime producer, Jeff Rose, was among them. And we all feel bad about that and wish Jeff the absolute best of luck. We'd love to have him back on the as a guest, and we hope you all will send in your emails asking Jeff questions to help entice him to be on the show, because we didn't have a chance to have a conversation with him before he left the company, and I think we're all sad about that. Mike was talking about it ahead of the show. Brian, did you want to add anything to this?
Well, it's always hard to lose good people in these kind of, business transitions that happen. And so, and it feels really unfortunate or awkward to have just, lost Jeff from one episode to another without him being able to be here, and maybe us being able to talk about, about what it's been like for him to be part of this and to be part of the Fine Homebuilding team. So I just want to kind of also second you, Patrick, in just recognizing the hard work that he put into this and how, excellent he was on the show. I also want to welcome Andres. I've had the opportunity to work with Andres on a few projects, and, I know that he will step into this role with vigor and will also be just an excellent part of our team. And then lastly, I would just want to acknowledge the transition from of Fine Homebuilding and other Taunton brands to this new company. I was surprised how many people have reached out to me about this since the transition happened just about, I don't know, was it 2 weeks ago now or 10 days ago or even less than that? It happened very quickly. And I guess I didn't, think that a business transition would be so visible to our contributors, our audience, and in sort of the general public. And so I guess what I'd like to acknowledge is how, challenging this kind of business environment has been for traditional publishers like the Taunton Press, traditional being publishers that made their business out of magazines and books, print products, and having to make this digital transition that's been occurring for, now a couple of decades, slowly but steadily, and disrupting those businesses. And we tried to meet the challenge in many different ways along the way. Some things we've done really well, and we've made some mistakes. And I can't and don't really want to speak for the Taunton Press or Active Interest Media and the intentions that they had for their businesses or the brands. I mean, what will happen at Active Interest Media remains to be seen. But what I do want to share with anyone listening about the staff at Fine Homebuilding is that I think what I've thought myself and what I've heard from everyone on the team, going through this transition is just that, as an editorial staff, we're just committed to doing what we do. doing the best that we can given the resources that we have to provide good, the best information we can for residential architects and builders and tradespeople and homeowners that want great information or want to tackle their own projects. So we're going to keep on trucking and trying to do that for as long as we can.
I agree. And Active Interest Media seems to have the same agenda. They seem to want to have Fine Homebuilding do the important work that we do without an interruption, and is with the quality and dedication to the content as we've always had. So we hope you guys will support the brand and the new company and our transition. And with that, we want to meet Andres, who I had the pleasure to work with yesterday on a video shoot for the first time. Andres, do you want to briefly talk about what you're doing for the company?
Yes, so I am an assistant video producer, and I started with Taunton last year, actually, December 5th. So it was almost a year before we actually, you know, became active media. What I've been doing is working behind the scenes with Colin, which is the senior producer, and pretty much doing all the video production as well as e-learning with David. So that's being my role, my main role in the company.
And we should tell
Andres,
folks that you are a committed DIYer in addition to being a producer.
Yeah, so I do like to work with my hands and here and then. So now that I have a home, now I can actually put those skills into use and do little upgrades here and then. And my first one was pretty much doing an outdoor kitchen. So that was the main project that I did in the house so far.
Well, I hope you'll go ahead,
Patrick. I want to drag a little bit more information to Andres because I had a 2-hour car ride with him, and he's underselling his experience. Because Andres, you've also worked as a framer, and you've also worked in building maintenance as a professional, if I am not mistaken.
Yeah, so I did that for about 10 years. I was doing video production before that, and unfortunately, I got into an accident. I had to stop. And then once I was able to work again, I had to look and search for something to do. And I found building maintenance to be, that transition. So I started working in the building maintenance industry, and eventually, went up to be a supervisor and a director. So I was, working behind the desk again. So I wasn't, really doing anything with my hands again. So I got a little bored. So I wanted to do another career change, and that's how I got into video production, which was my hobby, anyways. So I ended up working at Fine Homebuilding right after that.
And you come from, as you told me yesterday, a family of tradespeople. Is that right?
Most of my family are in the construction business, electricians, plumbers, all that. So I have a lot of people that I can ask, questions if I need to do something.
Well, I'm sure they know more than us, so we're going to call them in with some regularity, I'm sure. When I say this, I'm being very sincere. It is a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to getting to know you better and do the show.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we got an email from you, I think it was last week, Mike, showing the installation of your Mr. Cool ductless mini split. Can you tell us about that process? I'm sure there's many folks who listen to this show who are very interested in that, because the big selling point is you don't need special refrigeration equipment to install it, right?
So I learned about the Mr. Cool mini split system listening to the Fine Homebuilding podcast a number of years ago. Justin Fink put one in, and it came up briefly in one of the podcasts. So I was intrigued at the time, a DIY, because you don't need a vacuum pump, and you don't need to, have a refrigerant that you have to deal with or any of that. It's their system, or they have several different systems, but the one that I use, called the Easy Pro, utilizes a pre-evacuated line set, and they come in different lengths. One in length is 16 feet or 20 feet. So we are limited with some of the details on the install, which worked fine for what we were doing. And it just has a special coupling on the line set being the refrigerant lines, the return and supply line, basically. And you just put the fittings together, and do the wiring like you would with any outdoor unit where you've got to disconnect and all that, which is pretty straightforward electric, and then flip the switch and turn it on. It's pretty
How long did it
straightforward. And
take, Mike? Any surprises?
I did not install it. I read the instructions, which are pretty detailed, and I watched a quick video, and then I turned it over to my friend Addison, who's working with me, and I just said, "Here's what you got to do." He wired the whole thing, ran the conduit out to it with the disconnect and the water resistant flex line. It took him maybe 4 hours, start to finish, to do the whole thing.
Wow.
And that included he's ADD and OCD. He's got everything like that. So he had to have everything perfectly level. Like you look at the electric conduit and it's perfectly level, and all of the, the brackets. Oh, I forget, missing my term, but all of the connections to hold it, to fasten it, are all, to the 16th of an inch spaced apart all the way down equally. So anyway, you went to that detail. And yeah, I think the part that took him the longest was getting the line hide on it, a protective cover, which doesn't come with the system. So doing that, but yeah, about 3.5, 4 hours, start to finish, outdoor unit, indoor unit, the drain line, condensate drain for the indoor unit, and hook it all up and turn it on.
So
What
folks
size?
who have installed these have complained about the, pre-made line sets. Sometimes you have more line set than you need, and you have to kind of put a weird coil in it. Did you have to do that? How did you deal with that problem?
So I understood what that limitation was, that if you want your outdoor unit maybe say 8 feet away from the indoor unit, down below the actual indoor unit, and you got a 16-foot line set, then you got to make a coil. We did an unusual for the Mr. Cool install, which is we did a rooftop install for the outdoor unit, because I've got a flat roof at the house here in Tucson. So I could put it anywhere on this half-acre roof. So I just made the distance the exact length of the line set. So it worked out ideally. So it was in that regard, it's lucky.
Andres, are you familiar with these things? Have you been tempted to install one of these in your house?
No, I have heat pumps already in here. I have a split units here that were here when I bought the house. So I don't have a need for it. Yeah,
So you already have air
yeah, I do.
conditioning. Did you think about installing these yourself, Brian, in your 2 mini or 3 mini split system in your house? You're nodding.
Yeah, I briefly did, and it was one of the things that I ruled out only because of when you're building a house, you have to decide what you're going to spend your time doing and what you're going to have others do, and so that so that you can keep moving along on the things that you need to get done. And it seemed like, even though there probably would have been quite a bit of cost savings to doing that myself, it felt like something that I thought it would be better to have someone else do it, make sure that it was done right. It's a new house, and I don't have another system in this house, and then I could move along doing other things. But I've looked at them, and they seem, and now we've heard from Mike. I've heard from maybe 3 or 4 people who have installed them, and it seems to work. This the do-it-yourself system seems to work as described by the company from the feedback I've heard. Mike, I was curious what size system it was that you put in.
This was a 3/4 ton. It was the smallest in this, the model line that they have. I really only needed a 1/2 ton for heating and cooling, but it's doing a portion of the house. An in-law apartment is what it's essentially doing.
Okay.
And
And
it's
how much,
covering
Mike?
how much did it
How much?
cost?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about $1,350 with the tax of 8.7%. So, it wasn't bad. And yeah, I figured out if I, had to buy a, a vacuum pump and then do all of that, it was worth the extra upcharge versus buying a conventional system. And I think one of the things people have to consider is the performance characteristics on the SEER and the HPS, whatever, I forget the numeric, it doesn't have the same as what you can get out of some top line systems like you have, Brian, like a Mitsubishi system or a Fujitsu system or an LG system. So I'm not going to get the, super high performance, but it's going to be pretty high performing.
Yeah. Well, for comparison, on the cost, I put in a system capable of 3 tons of or 30 36,000 BTUs. It's capable of that. That's if you have 4 heads attached to it. I only have 3, so my system's capable of a bit less than that, or 3/4 of that. But with the outdoor unit and 3 heads installed by someone else, is $15,000. So quite a remarkable cost difference.
Yeah.
In comparison. So different systems, of course, but a huge cost difference. So.
I'm going to ask our podcast listeners if they think this is valuable fine home building content. Should we be teaching people to install, Mr. Slim DIY mini splits? I'm interested. I think a lot of folks would want to know how to do this for their garage shop or a bonus room or whatever, because if you can find a HVAC tech, if you can find one, it's going to cost thousands of dollars. And if you say you can do one of these with some reasonable skills in 4 hours, I think that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to share a brief story, folks. So for a long time, decades, the neighbors have lived in their house near me. And they recently, the lady passed away and the house was sold to a young couple. And they apparently took delivery of the property yesterday. Carol and I went for a drive around the neighborhood to look at Christmas lights, as is a tradition. And we saw that these folks already had a pile of debris outside their house where they were tearing into the finishes that date to the late 60s and early 70s. And I was just delighted to see them tearing into this place in the middle of the night. And we drove by around 8 o'clock. And there's a pile that is twice as big this morning. So they clearly went into it late at night. So good for them.
Patrick, you're a perfect neighbor for nighttime do-it-yourself, because not everyone would appreciate that.
I wanted to go help. Tempted to get my dust mask.
Wait till they find out you have a blower door and all kinds of tools in your barn, right? You could put out a little sign, rent here.
I'm tempted to go introduce myself, but maybe they don't want me involved, so it's hard to know what to do. But I wish them great success. It's a cool thing. I'm guessing they're in their late 20s or early 30s, and this is their first house, so they're excited, I'm very sure. So our first feedback email comes from Peter, and Peter had thoughts on the Massachusetts stretch energy code, which we talked about in a previous podcast, that if you do a room addition more than 1,000 square feet, as part of the code, you have to bring the rest of the house up to current energy standards. And he's got some experience with this firsthand. Hi, Patrick. Just listened to episode 606 on the new Massachusetts stretch energy code. Mike mentioned that ICC saying inspectors aren't enforcing the new code, which is not the case in my experience. I had the joy of being the first in my town to figure this out. The code is pretty simple to enforce by building inspectors. Does the proposed plan trigger the energy code? Yes or no? Then they need to see the proposed plan from a HERS rater, which is $1,500 to $2,000, showing what needs to be done to hit the HERS 52 score at the end, at which point they can issue the building permit. At the end of the project, the rater verifies the project has hit the 52 score and the other building requirements are met, solar pre-wire, EV pre-wire. Then they can issue the occupancy permit. Building inspectors probably won't know the intricacies of getting to the HERS 52 score, but that's not their problem. They just need to see the paper verifying. Builders, homeowners, and HERS raters have the hard job to hit this energy code. Below are the recommendations from my HERS rater to get to from the original 2,100 square foot addition and existing 1,100 square foot house to comply. They wanted me to air seal meticulously and add lots of exterioration and replace our perfectly good but old gas furnace and brand new but not terribly efficient gas hot water heater with an air source heat pump system. So they're going to replace all the mechanicals They're going to do a bunch of air sealing and hopefully meet their HERS 52 score. I'm guessing this will only be a blip for many people in their million-plus budget projects. For others, it will force them to cancel their project altogether. Unfortunately, it will have an economic impact too, since money isn't being spent on materials, contracted services. The third outcome I see is that some may reconsider what they really need from the project, adjust the scope and size, perhaps to just under 1,000 square feet to avoid the code. Reworking plans may be cost prohibitive, though, considering the cost of essentially going through the pre-construction stage again. For us, the code added about $70,000 to our budget, mostly materials aside from the air source heat pump equipment. I typically like to triple my material cost to gauge on how much I might be paying if I wasn't self-performing the work. $210,000 would have been an impossible pill for me to swallow. If you double it or leave it as is, those are large numbers. While reconsidering our project last spring, I heard Steve Basic say he would advise clients to build the house they will use 90% of the time. It seemed like good advice and made us think about what was really important to us: high performance, improved air quality, and building a pretty good house. We needed a mudroom to take off dirty shoes and snow gear, a dining room to host the whole family, a larger room for our family to spend time together in. For us, the code has been a royal pain, and our situation is probably unique, doing 99% of the work ourselves. But in the end, it was a good prompt to take a step back, reflect, and build the best house we know how to build and can afford, as opposed to the biggest. And I'm having so much fun building the best house as opposed to the biggest. I love it. The existing building was modeled based on our field inspection completed in February 10th of 23. The current home has a HERS index of 99. We then created updating the building model to the proposed addition and improving the envelope. What do you guys think? Peter's house is amazing. He has some statistics here. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I think Peter is already energy efficiency minded, as opposed to a lot of other folks that might encounter this code in Massachusetts to require upgrading your home when you trigger that 1,000 square foot addition or remodeling, square footage. So it's not a bitter pill for him to swallow, but for a lot of other people who aren't expecting it. It's going to be the extra $70,000 bump in the case he was mentioning could be, that's a lot of money to dump.
And his point is that that's materials only, because he's doing all the work himself. He said it would be double or triple, and I think that's probably a good guess as to what it would really cost. He has some specs on what he had to do to get to HERS 52. Add an ERV or HRV with 70% or better energy recovery, add an electrical vehicle outlet, add R20 and R7.5 continuous insulation to new walls, ceiling areas to be R60, all new and existing heating and AC to be upgraded to an air source heat pump with a 10.5 HSPF or 20 SEER, existing hot water heater to be upgraded to an air source hot water heater, and all new windows with U values of 0.27 and 0.3 solar heat gain coefficient. New foundation walls enclosing the conditioned space to have R20 continuous insulation and R10 continuous insulation under the new slabs. Existing walls to be upgraded with R13 cavity and R7.5 continuous, and reduce the air changes per hour from 10.7 to 4.5. I was able to generate a rebate of nearly $6,200 and furnace replacement rebate of $10,000. You could also apply for a POS rebate. Do you guys know what POS rebate? It's not what I'm thinking it is.
Point of sale?
Mm-hmm. So $750 for that, which I guess is domestic water?
Yep.
You figure? Yeah.
So that would be when he purchased the air source heat pump water heater. He got that right at the retailer.
What do you think Peter's luck was to be the first person to have to deal with this in the town? I would hold off on construction to see how someone else navigated this. Andres, what do you think?
I think it's a big project that he's working in.
Yeah. I don't know if you have had the occasion to listen to the podcast much in the past, but our listeners take on very ambitious projects, even if construction is not their business. They do some serious stuff, which might explain their nerdiest interest. You can imagine.
You know, what's one of the things that's interesting about his feedback is that this, and you know, I have sort of mixed feelings about this this expectation of having to upgrade, you know, what we're talking about, having to upgrade, you know, these existing houses to meet the energy code. But one of the interesting things that seems to happen in his process and in his thinking is that this being forced to do this, it seems to have kind of propelled him into, you know, doing more research and sort of changing his expectations a little bit in a way that I'm delighted to hear that, you know, he started to focus on, you know, quality of house rather than, you know, size of house and other things. And I think that's just, and we mentioned this a lot, but I think that's just such a hard thing for people to wrap their head around because this is, you know, we talk about building, but you know, we're also talking about a real estate market that doesn't necessarily yet value these things. And so I think that, like, this is people's money, and, you know, we need to be smart with our money. And so when the real estate market is pushing us towards doing the opposite, right? Maximizing square footage on your property, it's hard to come to these conclusions. But if you start to look at your house as, you know, a quality of life decision, you know, a health decision, you know, a climate decision, as much as an economic investment, I think you change your thinking fast.
It'll be really interesting, say, to look back 20 years from now to this whole Massachusetts initiative to where they require people to upgrade their homes entirely when they're putting on an addition or doing a significant remodel, to see whether it changed the real estate market, in that people 20 years from now are going, oh, that house has already been upgraded. That's a better purchase than an older one that hasn't been, that, you know, isn't going to perform as well.
I hope you're right. And in my experience, like, energy costs are never part of the conversation with a real estate transfer. And maybe this will motivate folks to pay attention to that. You know, like, okay, yeah, this house is going to be a lot less expensive to operate. So, you know, that should make it a better deal on the listing, right?
Exactly.
Well, I was having a conversation about some of this stuff with a person who works very much in policy earlier this week, and sort of in government policy. And one of the things that came to mind was we were talking about energy audits and the value of energy audits. And, you know, I sort of was ruminating on my sort of dream that building and energy audits would become part of the home buying process. You know, we tend to have these cursory building inspections that often don't actually give you much valuable information. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And, you know, to do sort of even a cursory energy audit where you just had a professional look at energy bills and, you know, do a few things like a blower door test and a visual inspection of some obvious, you know, places where energy is lost, you know, and sort of be able to quantify, you know, what your energy costs will be on a house. And then even what they might be if you did some improvements to the house might shift a home buyer's thinking about one house versus another, or maybe what their priorities are once they get into that.
Oh boy, I didn't know if your segue was intentional, but it is a great opportunity to bring up the after show, which is making energy improvements on existing houses. And Andres and I were on a project yesterday where this is going to be the exact case. Hudson Valley Preservation bought a house in downtown Kent that they intend to convert to their office space for their business. And it has a little barn in the back for their equipment and shop work. And they're going to buy this place and make some reasonable improvements. They're going to leave the windows in place, improve the air barrier, and make some other changes to improve its efficiency. And Andres and I were there yesterday doing a blower door test and tooling around with an infrared camera to look for big air leaks. So that was pretty fun. And there's more to come on that subject. And we're going to talk about some of these things you can do in the after show to improve the performance of your house. First question comes from Jim. Hey everyone, thanks for the useful information you provide through these podcasts. As a homeowner and basic remodeler, I truly appreciate it. My wife and I just bought a single-story house in Ohio. She wants to renovate the kitchen and 2 bathrooms. Fortunately, the home has a full basement with exposed ceilings, allowing me to see what currently exists, and I have full access to run new pipes. The home was built around 2003. After the water enters the house, it splits into copper for the outside irrigation system and CPVC. I've attached photos of the water main coming into the house. In following the supply lines to all the fixtures, they must have done some post-construction remodeling, as I see push fittings, PEX, and copper. There's not much pipe involved in the system, and I plan to replace it all from the water main to the fixtures. I also plan to install a drain valve at the main to allow me to drain the entire supply system when I leave for the winter. What is the best way to do this? I plan on installing a 90-degree with a 3/4 inch ball valve off the supply line. I can then run a hose from the valve to the crock pot when draining the system. I am somewhat familiar with CPVC. It is my understanding that it was predominantly used many years ago and seemed to have a stronghold in the trailer and prefab home markets. It's easy to cut and glue. It also seems to have increased in popularity due to the cost of copper and people entering homes to steal it. My concern is as it ages, it gets brittle and can crack. I am also not a fan of CPVC valves. Can you provide me with your thoughts on the current versions of CPVC available in the market and the benefits and detriments of using it? My hope was to use PEX. I'll be shutting the house off in the winter months, and I like the flexibility of the PEX pipes in the event of a freeze. I'm old school and am used to using copper and solder, but I do not want to use copper and solder for a variety of reasons. When I go to all the stores to look at the different methods to connect PEX tubing, it seems overwhelming. I know a major issue with PEX is the need for a tool, power, or hand. I am a tool junkie and can easily justify the cost of the tool, including the power version, to the spouse given the cost savings of my doing the work. When looking at the different methods to connect PEX, I see a few methods. They include tools that expand the PEX pipe large enough to slip over the fitting, pushing the PEX pipe over a fitting and compressing a ring around the connection, pushing the PEX pipe over a fitting and compressing a barb pinch clamp, and using push fittings. Please let me know if my list is complete or if there are other methods to connect PEX. At the outset, I prefer not to use push fittings for the long-term use. I like them for temporary repairs, but would appreciate your thoughts on using them for longer term. Okay, what do you guys think about this? PEX tubing, I think it's a good choice. Who wants to take it from there?
Well, I think you should take it all the way because you did a video with
Matt Milham did.
Yeah, he wrote an article and you guys did a video, and it went through all of the different types of fittings, relative costs. I watched that yesterday when I was, prepping for the podcast, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of really cool different fittings out there. And I know just a little bit. I've run PEX several times, and there's a couple of different types of PEX, and some are amenable to certain fittings and not to others. And do you have any input on that, Patrick, from what you learned from Matt's video that you worked on?
I'll give you guys the elevator speech as I remember it. So there are fittings that are the pipe diameter, and of course you have to expand the pipe to put it over that. And the advantage of that is you don't have any reduction in flow going through the fittings, right? And if you have a bunch of fittings, that might matter. The caveat is that most fixtures, excepting like your commercial dishwasher, can't use the amount of water in a pipe even of 1/2 inch diameter. It's just not, it just can't flow that much because of the modern plumbing rules, right? So I would say it doesn't matter. And I would use the system that you can get locally, because that matters to me way more than what the particular flavor of the fittings are. And that's my short take on it. Thoughts, anyone?
I think I agree. Get whatever you can find locally, whether it's at a supply house or whether it's at a big box store. The push to connect fittings, a lot of people are a little reluctant to use them, as Jim mentions, because people don't think they're going to last and work, but they have a good track record. And unless you mess them up like I did yesterday, everything can work just fine.
You can't leave that hanging. What happened?
Yeah, I know. So I learned, Shark Bite's one of the big manufacturers of the push to connect fittings. And I've used them particularly with quick repairs in rental houses because you could just push the fittings together. It's also a way to connect PEX to copper pipe or a different type of pipe. Most all the ones I've ever used, you can disengage them with a simple little horseshoe-shaped disconnect tool. There's this other type of shark bite I wasn't aware of, but I purchased unknowingly, called the Shark Bite Evo. It looks pretty much the same, and I used a fitting, and I switched inadvertently the hot and the cold on a connection, so I had to remove. So I removed one of them, and I went to remove the Shark Bite Evo, the PEX Evo fitting, and it wouldn't work. And I'm looking through the videos, trying to find what's the trick for getting this one off. Well, come to find out, you can't disconnect it. So know what you're buying. If you're like me and you get your left hand and right hand confused all the time, and you're hot and you're cold water, make sure you triple check before you make the connection if you use the fitting that can't be disengaged. But aside from that, they work fine.
I'm going to do a shout out to supplyhouse.com, not a sponsor. They are great. I usually get stuff in a day or two, and they're good about returns, and they have deep inventory, and they have all this stuff. And if you're live in a place without a local supply house, I would say it's a pretty good option. But if you do have a local supply house, it is always good to make friends with those people because they can really help you out in a bind. Jim went on to ask about PEX manifolds. I don't have any experience with that. It always made a lot of sense to me, like to be able to shut off individual fixtures. But then when I see the price of what those things cost, I'm like, who turns their water off that often that you would need to have a circuit panel or what amounts to a circuit box of plumbing fixtures? What do you think, Brian? Go ahead, Mike.
Well, one of the main advantages to doing a home run system to a manifold is that you don't have any connections in concealed spaces because you're running the tubing all the way to your next destination versus a T and branch system where you've got fittings in walls and floors. So that could be something if any of these current PEX fittings end up being like the polybutylene we experienced a generation ago, where the fittings deteriorated in walls and floors and started leaking over time. So that would be the main thing that I've always done a home run system to a manifold or sub manifolds, where that sub manifold is in, like a closet with an access panel near a bathroom where you've got, say, 3 cold water fixtures, a couple of sinks, a tub, a shower, so that you can at least access those fittings should that ever be needed. That would be my only thought regarding manifolds.
Do any of you have
I was just going to say, you can't build your own manifold, right? You don't have to buy a product. You can. I remember we did an article on this a while back, and I think, if I remember right, Justin Fink was the editor of that article, and he was, at the time, he was doing some remodel plumbing in his house, and he was so kind of taken by the simplicity of not only working with PEX, but building your own PEX manifold, that I believe he charged home that weekend and built his own PEX manifold for his house. And he talked about that on the podcast and how it was kind of simple and helpful it was. So you don't necessarily have to buy a product, a series of short pieces of PEX and valves, and you can build your own.
Have you bought a ball valve recently?
Manifold.
I was stunned. It was like, I want to say a 3/4 inch ball valve was like $20 at the home center.
Yeah, but on the flip side, with PEX particularly compared to copper or PVC, it's so cheap. The length of the tubing is so cheap. The fittings cost a lot, but the tubing's cheap. Versus copper, where the fittings may not be, out of line with the copper tubing, but the tubing is just like, might as well be gold plated.
It is beautiful though when you put it in there. Oh man, this plastic can't touch it. If I don't want to speak to CPVC, Jim, because I just don't know anything about it, and maybe listeners have experience with that product. It always struck me as I don't know. I'm not going to say. It's messy. I think that's what, like, the best CVP seam installation looks unprofessional to me. I don't know why.
And with PEX today, I mean, why go to CPVC? The PEX is flexible. You can turn elbows right without attaching an elbow to it, because you just bend it with one of those reinforcing um, uh, turns that Jim mentioned in his letter. PEX. Just forget about the CPVC. Take it all out.
This comes from Wayne. I know you don't get too many questions about attic air sealing, so I thought I would throw one to y'all. I watched Mike's series of videos on attic air sealing techniques on FHB All Access system. They're great, but I'm a bit confused by the material used to air seal the electrical boxes for lighting fixtures. Mike suggests that because the light fixture could produce heat, a fire-rated caulking should be used. It looked like this caulking followed ASTM E814 and UL 1479 as it showed up on the caulking tube in the video. Is this caulking necessarily rated to withstand higher temperatures more so than regular caulking, acoustical sealant, or does it possess what they call an intumescent characteristic? This characteristic will result in that caulk swelling when confronted by smoke and fire to hopefully restrict the expansion of the fire, or at least retard its progress. As the spray foams that are also called fire blocks or fire stop, also rated to withstand higher temps than the regular foams. I also have a wood stovepipe to seal around. Online resources suggest to fit sheet metal pipe around the pipe and then use fire-resistant caulk at the junction of the sheet metal and the stovepipe. I am thinking that this fire break or fire stop caulk is not meant for this application. You would need to use something more high temperature resistant, like Rutland 500 degree RTV. Okay, so for starters, do you need a special caulking? Is this fire stop caulking better? Is the foam products the same? These are complicated issues, and I think widely misunderstood, right, Mike?
Right, and I think it's time that Taunton Press take those old videos down, because the world has changed in the 10 or 15 years since I did those. Mainly LED lighting. We don't. If you can, I know. Yeah, you can find incandescent bulbs, but why? It's when we used to have to seal old recessed light cans. Our concern there was that you put an incandescent bulb in the can, and now the can's going to get hot, and if it doesn't have the thermal overload switch built into it, and you seal it up too tight, it can cause a fire. So using all of these materials that are more high temperature resistant was the thinking at the time, only 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. But now with LEDs, heck, just take the can out and put in a new LED fixture, which looks like a recessed light and is very shallow, and you avoid all of the problems with air sealing around those old cans. They're just a nightmare to deal with.
And if you want to make a really big project for yourself, I would read Larry Armando's article on safe ways to seal up can lights. He did some testing that was amazing and offered guidance on how to prevent a fire. And as Mike suggests, most people use LED lights, and that solves the problem because they don't get as hot. Folks listening to the show might say that the drivers do get hot, and if you have sufficient lights on a single driver, you might be trapping heat in there. Those are all important considerations. But if you the risk is that someone puts the wrong bulb in there, and if they have an incandescent 100-watt bulb lying around and they're needing light, they're going to screw that into the can light, whether that's what belongs in there or not. So that's why you might want to be more careful, especially in a rental environment or someplace where someone might do something unexpected.
I have a question about this that I think I've had this question for a long time and I've just never gotten it answered. But if you are using an airtight IC rated can, IC meaning a recessed light that is rated for contact with insulation, meaning you can put fiberglass bats or cellulose insulation right up to the light. Can you also seal it with a regular caulk or regular spray foam if you wanted to just maybe seal it to the drywall so that, the can's airtight, but maybe the connection, to make the connection airtight? Does anyone know the answer to that?
Yes.
Yes.
You can just use a good quality sealant, acoustical sealant, or caulking between the drywall and the rim of the can. Yep, because that's not really where the heat is going to be as high as it is deeper in the can where the light bulb is located, usually a little bit higher up.
Okay.
So yeah, the problem is, I think, with the non-IC rated cans and with the cans that are just ancient. They just were, a prehistoric can that wasn't rated for anything.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it as a non-IC rated, non-insulation contact rated can. Wayne also brings up his question about the stovepipe seal. I had a little experience with that. My friend Addison put a wood stove in a house that he lives in that I own, and he put the stovepipe through, and I had told him cut a hole in the sheet metal, run the pipe through, the stovepipe through to a chimney, which was on the exterior of the building. And he was like, well, should I seal that little tiny gap, that 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch gap to the metal? I said, sure, use this, intumescent caulk. And he put that in. And the first night he turned the wood stove on, that material, those sealants, the intumescent sealants, the fire blocking sealant, they're intended for a catastrophic event when you think about it, which is where there's a fire, and then it swells up, it generates this like smoke, not terrible, but some smoke, and then it seals that penetration in a particularly commercial building so that the fire doesn't spread. It's not intended for daily use, like in a stovepipe situation. So it expanded, and then it got kind of dry and crumbly and fell off a couple of days later. So, and in the meantime, he had the nasty smell in the room. So the best thing is cut the sheet metal as tight as you can, and you're done.
Isn't furnace cement, the appropriate sealant for these things? Yeah.
Yeah, but that's usually a masonry sort of sealant. The high temperature RTV, I'd be concerned about that because I think you might find with a wood stove you can get temperatures which exceed its temperature rating on the high temperature RTV. But again, I don't know. I haven't investigated it completely, so use caution.
I'm hoping that some folks who listen to the podcast who are more familiar with solid fuel appliances will weigh in on this because we might be a little out of our depth.
Yep.
This is a great question from Adam. Longtime listener, first time writer. I've listened to hours of y'all doing my best to seal and insulate my 1,100 square foot 1950s ranch house in southeastern Rhode Island. Sealing and insulating the rim joist, annoying but not so bad. Trying to seal around the edge of my wind-washed 412 pitch hip roof. Who the heck knew that 10 feet above, which is now, I'm sorry, I'm about as small as possible as adults come these days, 5'6" and 120 pounds, and I still couldn't fit in this tight space. My height and weight presents its own challenges on home projects, but that's a question for another day. My question is for Patrick, since he seems to be so fond of AeroBarrier. I'm curious as to the long-term durability of AeroBarrier. As I've heard you all say many times, houses move, so I'm left wondering about the tenacity and ability of aerosolized acrylic on a gap left to seal it during the long term. I've looked on the website and saw PDFs of their testing, which indicates they tested a 1/8 inch gap. Okay, but what if the gaps are bigger than that? While I've seen videos and understand how the product builds up on gaps to fill them, the last bit it fills, while small, seems like it would be very thin and fragile. Have any of you heard of anyone testing this after a year or two of service? I wonder if the house, if it's installed on, would show the same degree of air tightness after it's had time to settle and the sealant completely dry. I don't know, but I feel like an acrylic tape or properly sealed caulk would be a more robust solution. Which brings me to a second point. I found it a bit disheartening to hear you say you'd rather hire a third party to fix something that should have been done right while in the framing and sheathing phase. It took me to figure out what he was talking about, but Adam is referring to our fact of using AeroBarrier at all. That the home builder should be doing the air sealing work as the house is being constructed. I've heard you use the term hacks before, and putting the equivalent of a band-aid on a wound that requires stitches seems pretty hacky to me, and definitely not keeping craft alive. I also found it funny that when you asked who wants to spend hours taping and caulking, the only one to raise their hand was the guy who actually did it for a living. I think he's talking about you, Mike, right? As much as I enjoy listening and learning from y'all, sometimes I'm left shaking my head. Take care and happy holidays, Adam. Well, who wants to go first?
Well, sometimes every once in a while we get a lot of emails to the podcast, so I clearly don't respond to all of them. But every once in a while, I find one interesting enough to see if I can start a bit of a dialogue with the person who wrote it in. And I did actually respond to Adam on this. And for one thing, I'm just going to say that I totally agree with him. I mean, I'm not into AeroBarrier as your primary air seal, and I think I said that when we talked about it. And that's because my experience on both an energy retrofit and a new house, getting to pretty good air sealing results with a process that to me seems like very simple once it's incorporated into your workflow. So I totally agree with them on that. I think AeroBarrier probably has its place. My personal opinion is that I wouldn't make that in new homes. It's at the same time, I have the same question about all the ways we air seal. Is anyone doing blower door tests on the houses that they got these great numbers on a year down the road, 2 years down the road, 10 years down the road, to follow up to see if their tapes did the trick?
And spray foam, right?
Gunned foam, which is known to pull away from framing and other substrates as it moves, and an AeroBarrier is essentially a caulk. So same question about caulks used for this application. How durable is our AeroBarrier is a great question to ask, and I think it's going to take time. The mainstream importance of air sealing is new, in homes. And moreover, one more thing I'll add about it is that I'm also curious, very, very curious about the practical implications of air sealing once you get down to a tight house. In other words, like once your house is meeting the code, say once your house is meeting 3 ACH 50, in terms of air tightness, like what really are the benefits in terms of indoor air quality, in terms of comfort, and in terms of energy efficiency between 3 and the numbers that builders start to brag about, sub 1. I don't know, and no one's really. It seems to be a point of pride to get to low numbers, but is it something that we really need to do, or is hitting the numbers prescribed now by the IRC enough? So I have lots of questions about air sealing, the same as he does with AeroBarrier in particular.
Andres, Mike, thoughts?
I think AeroBarrier is going to have its biggest impact and probably be most utilized for contractors who aren't hands-on builders, where so much of the air sealing has to be done at point of installation. Think at the framing stage or at the drywall stage, and there could be many hands involved. Then to try to quality control that can be difficult for particularly production home builders and or contractors who are subcontracting out a lot of the work to get their subs on board. That's where I see AeroBarrier being a solution to that situation. To answer the question, how long is it going to last? I think hearing from the manufacturer, getting their information on their testing would be helpful. knowing that AeroSeal has been around for many years, for over 20 years doing ductwork, and it has shown in some reports that going back and testing things 10, 15 years later, yes, it's maintaining its air seal that it's done. So I think it's probably going to perform pretty well over time. And regarding just as for an N of one, Brian, you mentioned, going back and testing houses that we built years ago. I went back 6 years after having built the first Fine Homebuilding house, the one we did in 2016, and I tested it, air blower door tested it, and my number came in surprisingly. It was a 0.39 air changes per hour when I did it initially, and it was 0.38 when I did it after 6 years later.
So what?
So
Cobwebs like filled the holes, or what's
I
going on there?
wonder, and you don't think that 0.39 to 0.38 is a big deal, but as a percentage basis, I haven't done the calculation, but it's probably like a 2 or 3% increase in the efficiency, air tightness. So yeah, I think, and well, there are other things. I think it would actually have been lower than that, but there were some things I didn't check. So yeah, I think the dust actually accumulates much the way AeroSeal does in filling up all of those little remaining cracks and crevices and microscopic holes.
That surprises me, not because of your air sealing work. That surprises me because of doors and windows and weather stripping and the impact that use takes on operable windows and doors.
Yeah, I think I agree there. Yeah.
Well, as part of my sponsorship deal with AeroBarrier, I have a constant contact to Ross McPherson, who is the application engineer at AeroSeal Corporation. So I asked Ross about long-term testing, and here's what he wrote. I'm glad the listener was able to see our durability testing report. This was an accelerated aging process that is pretty standard for material testing in the industry. The process exposed the sealant to cycles of extreme high and low temperature while flexing the material simulating 50 years. The sealant retains about 20% flexibility throughout its life, which should be more than sufficient to accommodate the normal settling shifting of a home. This is a great question about the larger gaps. The standardized test uses specific criteria for gap size, which is smaller than many of the gaps we seal. When we think about how the sealant builds up in the gaps, it is important to know that during the sealing process, we are pressurizing the interior to 100 or 150 pascals. I know our normal blower door test is done at 50. This increase in pressure is for multiple reasons, but the byproduct is that the sealant bridges the gap. As the sealant bridges the gap, the increased pressure breaks the weakest point and forces that sealant further in. More sealant builds until it can finally withstand the pressures without yielding. The final thickness is sufficient to maintain the integrity of the seal during normal house movement. We do have homeowners who continue to let us test periodically, and from that subset, we have seen consistency with the original testing. We are always looking for more field data and welcome any homeowner who has had AeroBarrier installed to let us periodically test their home. Regards, Ross McPherson, Application Engineer, AeroSeal Envelope. Well, thank you, Ross, very much, as always, for your help. And thanks for the continued checks in the mail. I appreciate that, too. What do you guys think? Is this testing to be trusted?
I think that's a great deal for homeowners if he's offering for anyone who's had AeroSeal done to go and use their home to test their product. Think a free update on, it's like quality control in the future. You get a test, every 5 or 10 years, somebody's going to come out, do a blower door and see if it's still working. So you know whether or not it's working as a homeowner. So that's a pretty good offer.
I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of new homes built in this country, because otherwise they're not getting any air sealing. And right. these folks promise a number, and they have to keep blowing that stuff in until it's met. So I mean,
well, and in that example, Patrick, I would totally agree with you. I mean, of course, any air sealing is better than no air sealing. So if it is the approach that a builder needs to take, and it is going to improve all those things I mentioned before, the potential for better indoor air quality and comfort and energy efficiency, then if a builder's not going to incorporate sealants under their around their mud sills and all these other taped sheathing and all these other air sealing details that are available, then better than none.
you know, in that world, everything is about dollars. And I don't think those folks have the luxury of spending dozens of hours, air sealing and conventional methods to pay someone to do that work. And if you can hire a contractor to have it done in, you know, a day or a half a day, I'm guessing that's going to be a lot less money. And we all know what makes things take hold in the, you know, mass produced home building business. And that's time is money. But air sealing existing homes and improving their performance is the topic for our podcast after show. And I think many of you listening will find that topic interesting because we get so many questions about air sealing, as you all know. So hope you'll stay tuned. And if you are an All Access member, I appreciate your support. We all do. And stay tuned for that. Do you guys have any parting thoughts?
No.
I do. Jeff, we're going to miss you. I hope you're doing well. And I hope you're willing to come on the show and tell us what's going on. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mike, Andres, and Brian for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Send us your emails, please.